May 7, 1945. Alone on a dirt road outside a burned village in western Germany, an 18-year-old American woman with matted blonde hair and a swollen belly stumbled through the pre-dawn fog, one hand pressed flat against her abdomen, the other gripping the torn hem of a Wehrmacht coat she had stolen from a dead guard. She had been a prisoner for 9 months. She was 8 months pregnant. She did not know who the father was. The child she was carrying would one day serve the United States for more than 40 years in national security, advise on foreign policy, and hold classified clearance higher than most generals. He would never know his mother survived Nazi captivity to bring him into the world. He would never know until she left him a letter, opened 2 days after her funeral. This is the story she buried, and the letter that finally brought it back. Her name does not appear in any official record of American women held captive by the Third Reich. She never filed a claim. She never testified. She never spoke about what had been done to her, until she wrote it down, once in the final weeks of her life. By then, her son was in his 50s. By then it was almost too late. This story follows a young woman who represents thousands, whose wartime trauma was sealed by shame and a national refusal to hear what happened to women in enemy hands. She is a composite character, but every detail is grounded in documented realities. What happened to her happened to others. She had been born in a small Ohio town in 1926, the youngest of 4 children in a working-class family that valued duty and silence about difficult things. Her father was a factory foreman. Her mother believed endurance was a form of love. The girl was curious, headstrong, good at math. She read adventure novels in secret and dreamed of seeing the world beyond the factory smokestacks. She graduated high school in spring 1943 and joined the Red Cross as a volunteer. Her mother cried. Her father said nothing. Her brothers had already enlisted. She wanted to do something that mattered. By summer 1944, she was in Europe, assigned to a Red Cross mobile unit delivering supplies to field hospitals in France and Belgium. She was small, blonde, and visibly American, 3 things that made her both valuable and vulnerable. She learned quickly how to move through bombed streets without flinching, how to hold the hands of dying soldiers without crying. She was 18 and felt 100. In early September 1944, her convoy was ambushed near the Belgian-German border. The driver was killed. She ran into the trees. She was caught before she reached the next ridge. The men who captured her were Wehrmacht soldiers, part of a disorganized rearguard unit retreating westward. They were tired, angry, operating without clear command. She was American, which made her technically valuable. She was young and female, which made her disposable in practice. They did not send her to a formal POW camp. There was no paperwork, no Red Cross notification. She was moved from one makeshift holding site to another, abandoned barracks, cellars, locked rooms. She lost track of time. There were other women there. Most were silent. A few tried to resist. None succeeded. October 19, 1944. A basement in occupied Belgium. She knelt on the stone floor, hands pressed flat against the cold ground, while boots paced back and forth above her head. The guards were arguing about something in German. She did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. Someone was drunk. Someone was angry. She had learned by then, do not make eye contact. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not resist. Do not scream. Survival meant becoming invisible. Her hands, which had once held books and pens in the hands of dying soldiers, now lay flat and still against the floor. She stopped recognizing them as her own. That night, one of the guards came down the stairs alone. She floated somewhere near the ceiling while it happened. She counted the cracks in the plaster. She thought about Ohio. She thought about snow. She thought about nothing at all. When he left, she curled onto her side and stared at her hands in the dim light. They were shaking. She pressed them together until they stopped. By mid-December 1944, she realized she had not bled in over 2 months. She sat in a corner of the storage room where they were keeping her now, a converted schoolhouse near the German border. It was night. The guards were drinking. She pressed both hands flat against her lower abdomen and felt nothing but the ache of hunger and cold. There was no doctor, no test, no confirmation, just the absence of her cycle, the faint nausea each morning, and the terrible certainty that something had changed inside her. She had stopped crying weeks ago. Crying required energy she no longer had. Her hands trembled as she pulled them away from her stomach. She stared at them, thin, pale, dirt caked under the nails. They looked like the hands of a stranger. She thought distantly that these were the hands that would have to decide whether to live or die. She chose to live, not for herself, for the thing growing inside her that had no choice at all. That choice would follow her for the rest of her life. Pregnancy became a weapon. If she was visibly pregnant, they might move her somewhere with medical oversight, somewhere closer to where Allied forces were advancing. She began to eat every scrap she could find. She stopped trying to hide her body. She made herself visible. By early February 1945, her belly was unmistakable. The guards noticed. Their behavior shifted, not kinder, but more cautious. One older guard with a scar across his jaw began leaving extra bread near her corner when others were not looking. He never spoke, but he watched her with something that looked like guilt. She stored that guilt in her memory like currency. She thought being pregnant would make her safer. It didn't. March 28, 1945, the grain warehouse where they were holding her shook from Allied artillery fire. Dust rained from the ceiling. Mortar crumbled. The guards panicked. Some ran. Others tried to organize an evacuation. She was 7 months pregnant. She could barely stand. But she had been planning this moment for weeks. She crawled through a gap in the back wall where the bombardment had torn the mortar loose. She disappeared into the smoke. Behind her, the building collapsed. She had no food, no map, no papers. She wore a stolen Wehrmacht coat over a torn dress. She walked west, toward the sound of artillery, because west meant the Allies. For 3 weeks, she moved only at night. She hid in barns and ditches during the day. She drank from streams and ate whatever she could forage. Wild onions, dandelion greens, once a half-rotten potato. She avoided roads and people. She trusted no one. Her hands, swollen and cracked from cold, pressed constantly against her belly. The baby moved inside her. Each kick was a reminder she was not alone. On the night of May 6, 1945, she crossed into Allied-held territory near the French-Belgian border. She collapsed in a field and slept. When she woke, the war in Europe was over. She thought the hardest part was behind her. She was wrong. She went into labor on May 14, 1945, in a barn on the outskirts of a small French village. She had been there for a week, hiding, resting. The labor came suddenly, violently, without warning. There was no midwife, no doctor, no one. She tore strips from a blanket and bit down to keep from screaming. She braced against the barn wall, her hands gripping a wooden beam so hard her knuckles turned white. The pain was worse than anything the guards had done, worse because it was relentless, worse because it came in waves she could not escape, but also strangely clarifying. This pain had a purpose. This pain would end with life, not death. The baby was born just after noon. He was small, underweight, his skin tinged blue. He did not cry immediately. For a terrible, endless moment, she thought he was dead. Then he gasped, coughed, and let out a thin wail. She held him against her chest and felt something she had not felt in 10 months, a flicker of emotion that was not quite hope, but was close enough to keep her breathing. She cut the cord with a shard of broken glass. She wrapped the baby in the cleanest part of the blanket. She cleaned him with water from a rain barrel. Then she walked into the village and collapsed at the church door. The priest asked no questions, but the women in the village did. She returned to the United States in late June 1945. When asked about the baby, she said his father had been an American soldier who died in France. No one pressed for details. She went back to Ohio, rented a one-room apartment above a bakery, and took a job as a typist. She raised her son alone. She never married. She never spoke about the war. August 12, 1947. Late evening. Her apartment. Her son, 2 years old, dark-haired and serious-eyed, was asleep in the second-hand crib. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap, staring at the peeling wallpaper. Earlier that day, a woman from downstairs had asked where the boy's father was. She had smiled and said, "He died in France. We weren't married, but he was a good man." The woman had nodded sympathetically. It was the lie she always told. It was easier than the truth. But tonight, alone in the dark, she looked down at her hands, the same hands that had pressed flat against that cold floor in Belgium, the same hands that had caught her son in a French barn, the same hands that now typed legal briefs and wiped his tears, and felt something crack inside her chest. She did not cry. But she sat there, motionless, hands folded, until the sky lightened. When she finally stood to check on her son, her legs were numb and her hands were shaking. This was the cost no one saw. Her son grew up quiet, observant, intensely curious. He did well in school. He asked about his father only once, when he was 6. She told him the same story. He looked at her with those serious eyes and nodded. He never asked again. He went to college on scholarship, joined the army, served in Korea. When he returned, he entered government service, first as a State Department analyst, then into positions of increasing responsibility and classified clearance. By the 1970s, he was working in national security. By the 1980s, he was advising on foreign policy. By the 1990s, he had served for over 30 years shaping American strategy in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. He was respected. He was trusted. He was exceptionally good at his job. He never knew where he came from. She watched from a distance. She attended his graduation. She sent birthday cards. She visited once a year, always briefly. He invited her to his wedding. She went. She smiled for photographs. She left before the reception ended. She never told him. She never came close. By the time he was in his 40s, with children of his own, she was an old woman living alone in the same Ohio town. She worked part-time at a library. She kept to herself. People remembered her vaguely as the woman who lost her soldier in the war. In early 1998, at age 72, she was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. She had weeks, maybe a month. The doctor suggested hospice. She refused. She had something to finish. She sat at the small desk in her bedroom, her hands thin and papery now, marked with liver spots and the faint scars of wounds no one had ever asked about, resting on a sheet of plain white paper. She had been staring at it for an hour. Then she picked up a pen and began to write. She died in April 1998 in a nursing home on the outskirts of town. Her son was at her bedside. He had flown in from Washington when the hospital called. She was lucid until the end. Her hands rested on the white bedsheet. He held one of her hands and asked if there was anything she wanted to tell him. Anything she had never said. She looked at him, this man in his 50s with her blonde hair gone gray and a stranger's dark eyes, and a career built on secrets and strategy, and shook her head. No, she said quietly, nothing now. She died 3 hours later, just after midnight. 2 days after the funeral, while sorting through her belongings, he found a sealed envelope in the bottom drawer of her desk. His name was written on the front in her careful handwriting. Inside was a letter, dated March 1998. He read it standing in her bedroom, surrounded by the silence she had lived in for 53 years. The letter began, "There are things I could never say out loud, but you deserve to know where you came from, even if it changes how you see me. Even if it changes everything." She told him about the convoy ambush in September 1944, about the 9 months in captivity, about the men who held her and what they did, about the pregnancy she discovered on a cold stone floor in Belgium, about the choice she made to survive, about the escape, the labor, the barn, the broken glass she used to cut the umbilical cord, about the silence she chose because she believed it would protect him from shame. She wrote, "You were not born from love, but I loved you from the moment I felt you move inside me. You gave me a reason to live when I had none. You became a man I am proud of. You served a country that never knew what I endured to bring you into it. That is enough. That has always been enough." The letter ended. "I am sorry I could not tell you this while I was still here. I am sorry I waited until I was gone. But I need you to know, you were never a mistake. You were the only good thing that came from the worst thing that ever happened to me. And I would make the same choice again." He stood in that bedroom for a long time, the letter in his hands, staring at the words his mother had finally found the courage to write. Thought of the woman he had known. Quiet, distant, always careful, always controlled. He thought of the years he had wondered why she never smiled easily, why she never spoke about the war, why she flinched when strangers touched her shoulder. He thought of the life he had built, the career he had spent 40 years constructing, the decisions he had made that affected thousands of lives, and realized it had all begun with a decision his mother made on a cold floor in occupied Europe, when she chose to live for someone who did not yet exist. No government archive holds her testimony. No War Department file lists her name among the women held captive during World War II. No historian uncovered her story while she was alive. The only evidence of what she endured was the child she carried out of captivity, and a single letter opened too late for conversation but just in time for understanding. She represents thousands, American women, Allied women, civilian women, whose wartime suffering was erased by shame and a national refusal to confront what happened to women in enemy hands. Women who survived sexual violence and never spoke of it. Women who bore children conceived in captivity and raised them in silence. Her silence protected her son. It gave him a life free from the weight of knowing, but it also erased her, until she chose in her final weeks to break that silence. Her son went on to serve a nation that never knew her name, but he knew finally what it had cost her, and he carried that knowledge for the rest of his life, the way she had carried him through a war that tried to erase them both. What do you do when the truth arrives only after the silence can no longer be broken?